There's always advancements in how you're going to work. For every company across every vertical, the true differentiator is its people.
Hmm.
That's the only thing that any company can ever claim, because only one company is going to have you working at it. So you are either a differentiator or you're not at your company, because there's only one of you.
Hmm.
And so the people are always the differentiator. So I always try to create an environment. So I think if you talk to anybody who's ever worked for me, they'll say, yeah, it's just pretty requiring. I'm very hard charging. I want results. But what they will also always tell you is, I'm very supportive and I am there to help them be successful. What I want in return is, don't just accept things because that's the way it's always been done. Be courageous and offer ideas. And I think particularly in the data space, this is huge. You
Hmm.
look at any company, they will tell you what their initiatives are. When I read these articles, one of the first things I always think about is, what data are they collecting to assess what they ought to be doing to fix XYZ?
Hmm.
And I would challenge anybody in that space to do the same. If you work for a company, you hear you hear what it is they're focused on. There's data that helps inform those things. And I think it behooves people in the data space to surface up those ideas. So
Hmm.
I'm always looking for intellectual curiosity.
Yeah.
I'm always looking for people with, the other thing I will say is emotional maturity,
Hmm.
because just because you may have a great idea, I may not have bandwidth to do it. So I don't want you to get offended or think I'm not listening. You have to set very tight priorities if you're going to get some things done. But I think it's always about being curious about why things happen the way they do, and being able to offer new ideas.
Hmm.
I love that. The people that just get me so excited is the ones that say, "Hey, do you ever think we could do this? What about this? Why aren't we
Hmm.
measuring that? Why aren't we that?" No, it's a great idea. Let's see. What do we have the data to do it? Is the data clean? Is it reliable? Blah blah blah. But yeah, let's go test it.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Uh, Curiosity is definitely important across the board, but it's extra important in data science where you have to ask questions. You have to ask a lot of questions.
well, and especially, and here's the other piece I would say. I mean, that you cannot go a day without reading some article about artificial intelligence.
Hmm.
And the people who are not close enough to that, I actually had the fortune, at City, to play around with some AI and machine learning.
Hmm.
Um, it's a really great spot for folks in the data space to really add value,
Sure.
because artificial intelligence, um, is only as good as the inputs.
Hmm.
And so the inputs are data. And so, is the data pure? Is the data reliable? And is the data, because here's the trick with it. And I have an actual true story in when I ran HR analytics about the use of AI, and be careful, because even well intentioned data can skew things in a way that you may not have expected. At
Hmm.
one time, when I was at City, we wanted, everybody recruiting is always getting slammed with resumes, and how do you, for, I mean, and this is no lie. I mean, anybody in the job market, uh, you might have a posting and a recruiter might get 1,200 applications for
Sure.
one job. And I'm not exaggerating. I was on a call yesterday and the recruiter was telling me this. And it's like, how do you pour through it? Well, so like most companies, they use artificial intelligence to start to sort through, to hopefully cull the best of the resumes based on the role. And so we had played with that at City. And at one point, we said, well, we were going to come up with a bunch of keywords. And without thinking about this thing called unconscious bias or what it would do to the outcome,
Yeah.
one of the keywords was captain. Fairly innocuous word. You wouldn't think anything. Turns out it skewed all the resumes male,
Hmm.
because when you go back and look at the why of that, boys are captains of the football team.
Mm-hmm.
Boys, you know, are captains of this, that, or the other. There are very few things that a young lady might do where she's going to describe it as being the
Right.
captain of.
Right.
So there was a perfect real life example of nobody was being malicious. There was no, malevolence there. It was trying to identify good keywords, but it's also the example of how you really have to challenge and talk through using certain data and how is it going to skew your results.
I love that story. That's a great example, great illustration. Thank you for that, Lynn.
It's a real life.
Yeah,
It was,
sure,
you know,
sure. So if you're joining us on Instagram or on YouTube, thanks so much for being here. We have Lynn as our special guest today. She is a wealth of information across multiple industries. I don't want to say just HR analytics anymore because she obviously has a lot of experience. But go ahead and keep on putting your questions in the chat. Lynn and I are going to go for a few more minutes and then we'll come back to your questions. So go ahead and start filling up that chat with your questions. But Lynn, let's take just a little bit of a step back here because I love where this conversation is going. So a lot of my followers may not even know that these specialized analytics fields exist, like real estate analytics or HR analytics or internal audit analytics. So help us out here. Give us your elevator pitch on HR analytics. What is that? What is like that quick elevator pitch on? Hey Lynn, what's HR analytics?
So HR analytics, and I can only quite frankly speak to in financial services, but I suspect it's not dissimilar in other verticals. When you run HR analytics for a firm, it's the things you probably think about. You're measuring, you're basically reporting out, number of new hires, number of voluntary attrition, number of involuntary attrition, fancy language for got fired. Um, it's those kind of just the running of the business because every head count has a dollar association. So you always, and so you want to know, what's the attrition rate for a business, because attrition, new hire acquisition is expensive. So you track everything from that basic butts and seats in a shop, how many people leave, your cost for acquisition, because there is a cost to acquire new employees.
Sure.
Um, and that's sort of the surface stuff that you can just kind of push as a canned report because it helps a business unit understand their salary costs. What most people don't realize is that the highest number on any leader's P&L is their human cost.
Right.
It's not tech,
People, sure.
it's not buildings, it's the salary line.
Mhm.
So that's what we do in HR. Now, that's kind of table stakes. What I strove to do in the 3 years I ran HR analytics for Citi was, what else could we do? So
Mhm.
now you take it down. Bigger organizations will always have, and of course it's made the news again in recent weeks, they will have DEI initiatives.
Mhm.
So then you start looking, and I remember this was one that was pretty important to Citi. What are your diversity metrics? Now, diversity is interesting because it's a self-disclose, not mandatory at the time of application and onboarding. So part of the challenge is it's a self-disclosure. Anybody who's ever filled out an application knows
Mhm.
when it starts asking you gender, ethnicity, race, you always have a I wish not to disclose button on those apps. So all of that information comes in, but if you are responsible for diversity, and I would say the only reason to be responsible for diversity, this is Lynn's opinion, not sanctioned by any company, is I personally believe um, businesses ought to reflect the communities they serve.
Mhm.
So I think diversity is important, and I think it's also important because to me, diversity is about more than just kind of the check the box things. It's also diversity of thought. That being said, So in HR analytics, it goes back to what I said earlier. What are the goals of the firm around how you manage this most expensive asset at an organization, the human capital? How do you measure that? And what are you trying to accomplish with it? So then you start looking at everything from what is your makeup of men and women, different minority groups, veterans, disabled populations. It's also, where are you getting your performers from? What colleges are they graduating from? And there's all kinds of ways that you can use the data. But it really, at the end of the day, what HR analytics ought to be about is, what are the goals of a business unit with respect to managing this extraordinarily important piece of the puzzle? Because I'll go say it again, the people are the differentiator. So if you understand that, and then how you deal with them and how you help them be successful. So HR analytics really at its best is understanding what are the primary goals of a business unit with optimizing its people, performance, opportunities, career growth, all those things. And how do you let the data inform that, help them make those decisions?
Wonderful, wonderful. I like your message there, because that's something that I also include in my content, where even though you're doing data and you're a coder, or you're working in analytics, it all ties back to business impact, right? That's how we are all measured. It's not how well you coded or how fast. Do you have some sort of measurable impact that you can show about the business, right? Everything ties back somehow to a dollar value, right? No matter what you're doing. So I love that you're mentioning that, because I think that's an important message that, again, maybe somebody earlier in their career wouldn't necessarily understand.
If I can digress and share another real life story from when I took over the shop at Citi.
Yeah, please.
I came in, and like I said, there was maybe 250, 300 people across 4 or 5 sites. Very, very smart people. These were some of the smartest people I ever worked with. Some of these guys were PhD data scientists. I mean, these were no joke individuals.
Sure.
But again, I come in, never ran something, but I got a process background. I'm a bit of I've got a 3-year-old mentality where why is always my favorite question to ask. So one of the things, I started to just understand the new business I was running. How many reports do we push out every month? Canned reports. Just we generate them, push them out to the businesses. And I remember when I started, it was like over 5,000 of them. So when I went around my sites, I asked them, I said, does anybody know if anybody's reading these reports? We've been pushing them out for, I don't know, several years. Does anybody know if anybody's reading these reports?
Right.
Answer was no. I said, oh. I said, well, how about we do this? Now, I will confess, I have managed my entire career as ask for forgiveness, not permission. So that's a personal choice. Everybody
I
has
know
to
where
make.
this is going.
So at that point, I said, well, you know what? We're gonna conduct a somewhat unscientific test here, but we're gonna conduct this test.
Right.
I said, every report had a list of how many recipients. Some of these reports were going to 600 managers, 1,000 managers. I mean, Citi's huge, 250,000 employees, and we did all of the HR reporting for everybody, including the CEO's office and the board. So we went and looked at the reports, and I said to my team, I said, here's what we're going to do next month. These 10 reports, don't send them out. Don't send them.
Right.
Let's just see who comes back
Sure.
on the 6th or 7th of the month to ask where the hell their report is. Well, as you might imagine, nobody.
Right.
So there was my first data point. Maybe these reports are not adding the value we think they're adding.
Right.
That we're spending hours producing every month. So then my second unscientific test. Now we're going to do this a different way. Let's send out these reports, only encrypt them with a password. Right. And let's see how many people come back and ask for the password.
Right.
because we're gonna oops not include the password in the you know so we did that same thing. So some of these reports that had thousands of recipients, maybe two people came back and said, hey, didn't get the password.
Right.
On the basis of those two unscientific tests, we've revamped the entire canned report suite, and we eventually got it down from over 5,000 reports down to under 2,500 reports.
Nice.
Half. Now, what was cool about that for my guys, I didn't cut nobody for doing that. I mean, that was a huge productivity shift. The way I sold that to the bank was, we're going to stop producing these reports that clearly nobody's using anyway. But now I'm going to have my service delivery guys meet with you, and we're going to ask what kinds of customer reports you would want to get that would help you run your business better. And now, because you freed up my people, these very smart people, I can do something that's more valuable for your shop.
Yeah.
So that's how we did that.
I love that. Yeah, you're hitting on a lot of topics there, and the one that I think just reminds me the most is sometimes when you're such a strict technology guy, right? Somebody comes along and says, "Well, why are you doing that?" And they say, "That's just the way we've always done it." I mean,
Yep.
like no, just nobody's bothered to ask, right? Nobody's bothered to say, "Well, why?" So I love that story.
And that's the thing that if I could, that I would beg and ask all of you as you're in those roles, here's what I would say to you. It's not about where you are in the hierarchy. Always behave like it's your organization.
Mhm.
I always joke about, if it was the Bank of Lynn, I would always say that if this was the Bank of Lynn, is this how I want to spend these extraordinarily bright resources? And so when the answer for that is no, then I try to figure out, well, what can I have them doing instead? And that is not something that only somebody in a specific place in the hierarchy can ask. If
Mhm.
you're doing something in a role, you gotta find a way and a time to pick your head up to understand, I'm doing
Right.
this. Why am I doing this? Is it really having the intended impact on the business? And at least ask the question.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Very important. Love that, Lynn. So guys, feel free to keep on filling up the chat with questions. I'm already seeing a couple there. So Lynn, I want to start going on these questions. Um, but
Perfect.
be, but before we do that, help us out here. How can people find you? How can we support you? How can people stay in touch with you?
So y'all are gonna laugh. The easiest way to find me professionally is on LinkedIn. Just look up Lynn Labrador. Yes, Labrador is not a suit. That is my actual last name. It
It's
is
not a
a
stage name.
no, it is not. It's a less common Latino last name. It's in Spanish Labrador, but in English Labrador, like the dog. And yes, for those that are curious, one of my dogs is a lab. But you can find me on LinkedIn, Lynn Lynne Labrador.
Okay, great, guys. So if you want to stay in touch with Lynn or you want to support her, Lynn Labrador you can find her on LinkedIn. That's the primary contact way. All right, Lynn. So let's start looking at some of these questions, and feel free to, if you're listening to us, feel free to add your question either on Instagram or on YouTube. But Rohan is asking, how does HR analytics help with overall HR policy? How does it add value to process compared to a pre-analytics era?
I think thank you, Rohan. That's a great question. I, again, because of my Six Sigma background, I often wonder, you can't, I guess the easiest way to answer it is, there's an old saying in business: people don't do what you expect, they do what you inspect. And I feel as though analytics is the inspection. So many organizations will tout, oh, we're trying to hire veterans. Oh, we are committed to the LGBTQ community. Oh, we're committed to this, that, and the other. But without the analytics, It's lovely press release. What analytics does, what HR analytics does, is it actually informs where you're getting it right, where you're getting it wrong. Now, analytics is only part of the question, because the other thing I get on my high horse about is you should be asking anytime somebody's asking you to do a dashboard, because dashboards end up being kind of the fallback of give me this dashboard that shows me this, whether it's in Tableau or some other program. The question you should be asking is, if you've been asked to do that work, is this dashboard going to drive a decision? Because if it's not, then something's missing. And I think about that a lot when I would look at some of the diversity metrics, because every organization has different pay bands, and how you measure your diversity at certain leadership levels is you look at those bands. At Citi, C14, 15, 16 is where you start to get into the more senior leadership bands.
Sure.
And so then you start looking, well, on a self-disclosure, how many of them meet the diversity metrics? Well, you can report that number, but when you see the number so skewed, and you always do, sadly, what the analytics won't on a canned dashboard report is to tell you how and why. So what I always tell people is a dashboard may be the starting point, but as a leader, you still got to dig under that, because what you're not going to have visibility to, at least not yet, is what programs are in play that would move those things. So your question around how does the numbers drive process? Well, I'll give you a real life story. So if at one time when I was at Bank of America, I was the co-chair for our diversity council. And at the same time, like every other organization, we looked at our numbers and we said, Jesus Christ, at the front line, in some markets, we were over diverse. I mean, we had 65% diversity, but you saw a marked flip when you got to what was called the B4 level, which was department head. So, B4, B3, B2, B1, those are your exec levels. And there was a literal flip where now all of a sudden it was 20% minority, 80% non. And we said, okay, that's great. What's going on? So then we went back and got some more data to look at the performance reviews, the performance evaluations of those people.
Mhm.
Didn't seem to be any stark difference there. So then we dug deeper, and then this gets to Rohan's question. How did we change process? We instituted a formal high potential program for minorities that mandated any high performer in a marginalized group had to be assigned XYZ mentor for the next 2 years. So the reporting and the analytics of that reporting drove policy and drove the process, because the numbers are great, but you don't do anything with them. We've all been victim at some company, and for those of you that haven't started, you will be, of the annual VOE survey. I watched this happen at Citi. You do this annual Voice of Employee survey. One of the lowest scoring questions was, do you think anything's going to change as a result of the survey? And the answer got worse and worse year in and year out, because you get all this data, you don't do anything with it. People, and then what we watched happen was participation in the survey started to drop. So it starts with, no, we don't think anything's going to change. Then they just stop doing the damn thing. So analytics is very powerful, but there have to be people who take the numbers and start to get at root cause of what may be dry, and testing some different things. So Rohan, I hope that answers that question a little bit, but it's a very powerful place to point people in the right direction of the things they can do.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. So our next question is from Patrick. I just graduated with my PhD in physics, where I did a lot of data science work. I don't have any job experience. I've had good interviews, but other candidates are chosen. Any advice to stand out?
What I will say to you, listen, I feel your pain. So at the risk of TMI, I myself have been looking for my next gig for the last 2 months. So I'm living what you're going through. And I think it's, I'm not going to give you doom and gloom. What I'm going to tell you is you only need one job. And on any given day, there's thousands out there. You just got to make that connection. Here's
Mhm.
a couple bits of advice that I'm using that's helping open doors. I think it's important, even in school, while you say you have no job experience, I'm betting in the course of getting a PhD, God bless you, you're way smarter than I am. I only have a bachelor's. Um, you probably participated in different projects or things where you had to solve things. And I think on your resume, you need to call those out, because I think one of the concerns for a lot of recruiters is, and I will say this as somebody who's hired hundreds and hundreds of people, I think, what the schools don't always do such a great job of is helping graduates understand how to translate the work they did academically into how you will apply that in a real workspace.
Mhm. Sure.
And so that would be my advice. Think through some of the challenges, some of the projects you did through the course of your learning, because those will have applicability to how you could add value in an organization. And Patrick, again, I'm on LinkedIn. If you want to have a one-off, I'm happy to have that with you. Because I feel your pain. It's a tough market, but then again, just keep the faith. I know that sounds easy. You just got to make some connections. The other bit of advice I would give you, um, I don't know how active you are on LinkedIn, but for whatever the role is you're applying to, do a search. This is something you can do on LinkedIn that I don't know everybody knows about. But in LinkedIn, most people go in and do a search for a person or a company. You can also type in the role you're looking for. So say you're looking for a role as a, data analyst or whatever the title is. Put that in the search bar and click the people. There's a button, there's a bunch of buttons that'll say jobs, company, blah, blah, blah. Click the people. What that will give you, and it'll be in the millions, oh, by the way, of people who in their profile summary list that job role as part of who they are.
Mhm.
You can further sort that for where you live. So like when I do it, because I still do it, I do operational excellence or I do transformation executive. I will click US or I will click Boston area because I live in Massachusetts. No, this is not a Massachusetts accent. I'm a New Yorker, but I moved here because of my daughter. Um, and yes, I'm still a Yankees fan and a Giants fan. Uh, but so, Patrick, you can go in LinkedIn and do a search on the actual job title you're looking for, do a search, click on people, and then find some people at, ideally, you probably have in your mind um, some target companies that you may be looking for. So now you'll have a list of people and it'll say current title, blah, 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 at company X. Drop them a note. I'm a recent graduate, looking for my first role. I see you're in this field. Would love to get your advice on how to connect, on how to, open those doors. Would you be willing to connect? Send it
Mhm.
as a connection request. And if they accept, set up time with them, a half-hour conversation to just talk to them. What do you like about your job? What do you like about this company? What advice would you give me? Here's the magic in that. You're not calling them to ask them for a job. But 9 times out of 10, if you make the right impression on them, they'll offer to help you.
Mhm.
And that's when you can say, well, I'd love to give you my resume if you know anybody, blah, blah, blah. You'd be shocked how often that happens. I had a conversation with the chief risk officer at Eastern Bank on Friday for doing exactly what I'm just telling you to do. People
That's
want to
great.
help.
That's great.
They don't know you need the help. So so that would be my advice.
I
Hopefully that.
like that advice, Lynn, and I certainly have been the recipient of some of those similar emails. Um,
Have you ever said
but
no when somebody did that?
well, here's where I'm going with that. It depends. You got to craft it right, right?
Hmm.
Because there is
Yeah,
an art,
it can't be the I'm looking for a job, come help me. They don't know you
right?
from Adam.
Right.
And
And I've gotten those, right? Yeah.
I personally will not put my integrity on the line for somebody I don't know.
Well,
So
that's exactly what I tell people. When I get some of those messages, it's like, hey, I don't know what your goal is here, but this is a very low probability message of hearing back, right? The hiring managers I know are never calling you back on this. So I would encourage the people listening to us. Lynn's giving us really great advice here, and as she says, she still uses it now. But please make sure that you're crafting those messages and in the meetings and the follow-ups with a level of manners and etiquette that is appropriate for the situation. Because otherwise, you're not going to have the same success.
yeah, I mean, like I said, you never want to go into a stranger and say, "Hey, help me get a job."
Hmm.
But having said that, I will also tell you I have templates for all of these things because I don't want to have to think about it. And Dennis is spot on. There's a way to craft it that is not asking for a job, does not breathe
Sure.
desperation, doesn't it really, and I'll be honest with you guys, it isn't about getting a job. Because I'm gonna tell you what, guys, whether you have a job or don't have a job, the thing what you need to think about in your careers, and if nobody's ever told you that, remember who told it to you first. There is no such thing as job security. But here's what is absolutely possible: career security. Jobs are fleeting, anything can happen on any given day. It's happened to me 5 times in the last 20 years. Do I look unhappy? I am not. I don't ever expect job security, and not for nothing, that's very freeing. What I have is career security.
Sure.
How did I get career security? It's called creating meaningful relationships. This right here is what I do every day. When a former colleague who I've had a great relationship with asks me to do something, I do it. I don't get paid. Dennis doesn't get paid, but we do it because we have a meaningful relationship. Now, guess what? Tomorrow, if Dennis, who knows my background, were to come across a job that he thought I'd be perfect at, who do you think's going to be the first person he reaches out to? The bumbalan who just sent him a, hey, I need a job, help me? Or the person who gave without any expectations in an authentic way to build a relationship and have a relationship? That's who they're going to. So, no such thing as job security, but you absolutely own career security. The day I lost my job in June, that day alone, you would have thought I was a rock star. My phone blew up without me even posting anything on LinkedIn. I had 10, 20 people reach out to me the afternoon I lost my job. Hey, I just heard you're no longer with. How can I help? What can I do? That's the power of relationships, guys. Never minimize that. But they got to be authentic.
Yeah.
You got to be willing to give. It can't just be you reach out to somebody you haven't talked to in 5 years and all of a sudden you're going to ask them and say, hey, help me find a job. That's you got to cultivate those relationships, but they will create career security for you.
Wonderful. I love that message, Lynn. Yeah, there's a whole art to crafting those, but it gets easier with practice.
Especially when you
Um,
create a template.
right.
I legit have a template that stays within the 300 character limits of LinkedIn.
Oh, that's right. There is a limit. Okay. Very
It's
nice.
300. I have it crafted down to where it stays within 280. I'm
Wonderful.
deadly serious. So if anybody, like I said, LinkedIn, come find me.
Thank you, Lynn. All right. So Michael is asking, um, oh, right. Yeah. By the way, Lynn, I did want to touch on one more thing that you mentioned to Patrick also. is I love your mentioning of, you got to keep your chin up, right? You got to keep a positive attitude. I try to encourage that in some of the other content that I put out because job searching is hard and it can beat you down, but you got to keep a positive attitude because that will come across in your interviews. If you're like
Absolutely.
beaten down, that will come across in your interviews, and then you're swimming upstream. But
Yeah.
thank you for mentioning that.
So I have an acronym that I would tell everybody to write down, and I'm gonna tell you what they are and
Okay.
what you need to do. So write down CT as in Tom, FAR. CTFAR. C is circumstance. C is empirical facts. You don't have a job, you want a job. That's a fact. They're not, but everything down from that is in your head. The first thing is thoughts. Are you having positive thoughts, negative thoughts?
Hmm.
Oh, I got a bunch of leads. I just need one job. I'm good, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Thoughts. Or, oh, I'm never going to find a job.
Right.
Oh, you read LinkedIn, it's so negative. Nobody's, the job
Right.
market is insane. Those are thoughts.
Yeah.
Those are not facts.
Yeah.
That's thoughts. The next thing that drives feelings. You can feel defeated, feel worthless, or you can be pumped up. I am
Yeah.
one phone call away from getting my dream job.
There you
That's
go.
all it's, you know what I'm saying? It's feelings. What thoughts and feelings do is drive your actions or inaction.
Hmm.
Because when you're feeling positive, your tone, you're gonna, you know what? Lynn is right. I'm gonna do that search. I'm gonna send out some notes. I'm gonna try and make some little that. Or if you're feeling, oh, there's no point, I'm gonna go back in bed. I'm gonna watch
Right.
Netflix. I'm gonna,
Right.
and those actions, by the way, is what's gonna drive your results.
Love it. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
never get a thought or a feeling confused with facts.
Yeah.
And the other bit of advice, don't let nobody else's thoughts get into your thought line. Because you're
Lynn.
talking to people that are so negative that you're going to be like, oh, dear Lord, that's 5 minutes of my life I'm never going to get back.
Yeah.
Don't let those thoughts get into your thought line.
Lynn, I want to build on that because you're
Yeah.
reminding me of something that we talked on my stream. I think just last week or within the last 2 weeks, where because of social media and particularly data science, you hear people saying, "Oh, the interviews are so hard. Oh, the field is oversaturated. Oh," but those are the people that bombed the interviews. So why do you want to be
Well,
taking advice from
and
them?
oh, by the way, just by listening to them, you can tell they have negative thoughts. So how are they
Exactly.
going? How are they approaching what they're doing?
Well, that's exactly what I said. Well, how do you know that person's not an idiot? How do you know they didn't prepare for the interview? How do you know that you can prepare better than that person?
That's
So
why I say
yeah,
never
I hear
let
you on that.
somebody else's thoughts go into your
Exactly.
thought line.
Exactly. Yeah,
That's them. That's a
yeah,
them problem, not a
yeah,
you problem.
yeah, yeah. And like I said, I'm tying it back to the audience here because it happens so much in the data science, data engineering, all
It
those jobs.
happens everywhere.
Right. Right.
Happens everywhere.
Yeah. So what I tell them also too is sometimes these trending things start on Instagram or whatever about how the interviews are hard or what the interviews are asking, and then I always say, well, what research did you do to verify that? Did you verify that for yourself? Because if you didn't, then you're
Just a thought. It's not a
right,
fact until you can verify it.
right, and then
What
and
I
then you're
always
driving
say,
yourself crazy.
would that comment stand up in a court of law? Because if the answer is no, don't incorporate it.
Right,
Don't incorporate it. And
right,
this maybe sound really way off the reservation. I'm gonna tell you what, guys. You get what you put out. I have not drawn a
yeah,
paycheck for 2 months. Do I strike you as somebody who looks unhappy or no? I'm very encouraged because when the right job shows up, it's gonna be mine. I have no doubt. And in the meantime, I'm going to just keep helping other people, doing what I can to put positive energy in the universe because
right.
that's what's going to come back. That's all I can do. There's the pieces you control. You don't control what anybody else thinks. You don't control what anybody else does, but you 100% control your thoughts and feelings and what you do.
Love it. Great message, Lynn. Thank you so much for that. So let me keep on moving on here because there's a few more questions. Michael asks, what tools and technologies are you currently using for HR analytics as someone with a tech background? How do you decide which new tools to adopt, and how do they integrate with existing HR systems?
Oh, you just said the magic, painful word. I'll tell you who's had a really great run in terms of a technology solution, and I actually lived through it. It was one of the last things I did at Citi. We went on Workday. Now, Workday is a big HR system
Sure.
that, again, the devil's in the details, because what Workday does allow and enables, if it's installed properly and you can get everybody behind it, is it allows for a lot of self-service. And so, there's a lot of things that people having to call HR or do something that Workday allows a lot of process automation. But in terms of picking a solution, it really depends, because there's other solutions. I mean, you hear Paycom, Paycor, there's a bunch of other HR solutions out there. I think a lot of what it relies on is what's the size and complexity of the organization you're trying to deal with. A very small organization, you think of some of these tech startups, they don't have the money to invest in a Workday, nor do they need it. So it really depends, so that's sort of what ought to be driving any technology spend, and I don't care what space it is what do you need it to do? What are your must haves, nice to haves? I've done a bunch of these across a lot of different parts of a bank, in terms of buying platforms. But you said the magic ugly word, and it's the one that I think gets, and it's quite frankly how I've earned my living over the last several years. It's the integration, because what a lot of organizations tend to do is they have a need that their current solution isn't fulfilling. They buy another solution, bolt it onto that one, and then they keep going. And that's all well and good, but over the course of time, you end up with a spaghetti ball. And where that chicken, this is an old saying, where that chicken is coming to roost now is at a much higher level, is as now everybody's trying to get to the cloud. So there's cloud enabled, there's cloud, native. And while you'll hear people talk about those as interchangeable terms, they're very different. A cloud native solution means that its architecture is built in such a way that it can take advantage of all of those cloud microservices that become available. You'll hear companies talk about software as a service, cloud native software as a service, where you either pay, you're charged monthly rather than a license. You basically, the liability for keeping the program running sits with the vendor. You get charged based on number of active accounts or number of seats, number of current users, all of those things. The biggest trick in most organizations is sorting through the integration point. Now, I'm a big fan of API, if API is done properly, because it's easy. But not everybody can do that, because I think we're in sort of that depending on the maturity, and you'd be surprised at how immature even some very large, well-established organizations are.
Sure.
Uh, there are some things where you may have to do an integration with one of your essential third parties that sends you an XML file, a flat file. So
Hmm.
you really, so integration becomes very, very tricky depending on how many tentacles out from that solution you've got to have a bi-directional feed with. So integration becomes a nightmare. It just does,
Absolutely.
because and I have gone into organizations and said, well, why do you still have this software? This software is there. One of the things I always look for is, are there opportunities to sunset software? Because what ends up happening is you'll buy a piece of software to augment something, but it also does some other things. And so then you start having redundancy, only nobody does anything to sunset the tech. And so you end up with this bowl of crap that, and it's a death by a thousand cuts, because all of this stuff, gets charged and charged back and whatever. And it's hard to keep track of all the costs. I remember one time, one of the things I got asked to do at Citi when I was in global ops and tech was, can somebody please tell me how much fraud prevention costs this organization? And Citi, mind you, has a system that actually tracks every software that's been bought, what version, what country, blah, blah, blah. So you start there, but then you go and figure out what else have they bought that maybe isn't in this system, because humans don't always enter things. I remember going to the head of tech and told him I stopped counting at $1 billion a year we were spending. And that's
Wow.
everything from fraud detection, AML, all of the, all of it. It's an outrageous sum of money if somebody takes the time to cost it out.
Sure.
And the bigger and older the organization, the more of it there is.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely appreciate your points on integration, because, coming back to what you said earlier, that's not really something that you would understand making the shift from school to a company. The way I've illustrated that, bringing it back to data science, is that when you're in school, the data is just given to you and it's all nice and neat and ready to go.
Right. You don't have to
But
make sure it's clean. You don't have to make, yeah.
Right. But when you get into the corporate world, it's you gotta pull it from a PDF that's emailed to somebody else's inbox, in another country, and you got to bring that data. It's all those pain points.
And let's not forget, some countries don't let their data leave the country.
Sure,
When
sure.
GDPR came into being, my Budapest team only could do the reporting for the German market because that data couldn't sit in Florida.
Right.
Because of GDPR. Can I give a real life story about the power of integration and data and the difference between what you learn in a classroom? Because I remember one of the things you wanted me to talk about was a tough situation.
Yeah.
So let me give you a real life tough situation and the power and problems with data integration and all this good stuff. So as I said, my team was responsible for all the HR reporting. So when I was doing my roundtables, now I made it my business to do a weekly one-on-one with each of my directs, and then every other month touch base with even my first line data analysts at the sites. And I remember sitting in a roundtable with them in Florida, and I said, it seems like some of these reports take a while, especially some of the candidacy slate reports. What's going on there? Why? Because so Citi used Taleo as its recruiting software. So that's where back then, now it's Workday because we did convert to Workday, but back then it was Taleo. And so you had the applicant, the self-disclosure. We had already decided anybody who didn't disclose just went into this other category. And I said, why does it take so long to get these reports out? Well, because some business units send those follow-up emails to change some of the data because they said there's something wrong with Taleo. Now, mind you, I had not heard that there were any problems with Taleo. So I went back and I went to IT first. I said, guys, I'm hearing from my guys that there's problems with Taleo. Has anybody is there anything in Jira? Is there anything in ServiceNow where anybody's reporting problems on Taleo? No. I said, all right. So I go back to my guys. Who's sending these notes? So there's a few different business units. Add this candidate, do this, do that. Like, why? Problems with Taleo. Really? Why just check with IT? They say there's no problems with Taleo. Well, my recruiters in XYZ country don't like Taleo, so they don't always enter everything into Taleo. And I said, well, and sometimes the candidate doesn't select this, and so then we do. I said, okay, we're not doing this anymore. The bank has invested in a system. The data in the system, there's nothing wrong with it. If your recruiters need to be trained or have it be enforced they use the system, then you do that. But on this day, from now on, we're only going to report on what's in Taleo. And as the global reporting team, our report is the one that counts. You don't like the numbers, they can come to me and ask me if something is missing, and we'll look into layout. But if it's a training issue, deal with it. If it's a whatever, my favorite email in that whole nightmare, because this turned into a big bureaucratic thing, I had to say to my guys, I'm going to be the bad guy. So the next email you get, tell them that you were told that you no longer could massage data, copy me, and tell them if they had any questions to come to me directly. Because I did not want my guys to get the blowback. They were not getting paid enough for that noise and the bureaucracy at Citi. So the one that I threatened to go to our CEO with, because there is no shame in my game, I got an email that got forwarded to me with the sorry, but we're not doing that. Was one of the people in one of the groups wanted us to change the candidate slate reporting and change a candidate that was applying for a very senior role as from being white female or undisclosed to Latina because her first name was Maria.
Wow.
Stuff you can't make up, guys. I went back to my guys and I said, listen, I'm not going to be an ass here, but I am going to be an ass because senior leaders, part of their comp, part of their incentive is hitting those diversity candidate slate numbers. And what I said to my guys was, if we're massaging reports like this, and we know that those numbers ultimately have an impact on incentive, that, in my view, is no different than stealing from the teller drawer. We are not in that business. And I will go to Mike Corbat, who was the CEO at the time, and I will ask him what he thinks of this if we get any more pushback. That was probably the toughest situation that I ever dealt with. But fortunately for me, when I went to the leaders and explained my rationale and showed them this email with the names blacked out other than the context of the email, they were 100% behind. But again, this one of my analysts came to me with this. Well, this is the email I got. So it's,
Wow.
yeah.
Very interesting example there, Lynn.
Yeah, I remember my reaction to the change it to Latina because her first name was Maria. I'm like, they never heard of Maria Schreiber? This is, I'm not sure how that's a, yeah.
So we are past an hour. Are you okay to continue, Lynn?
I am.
Okay. So Rahul asks, what are the metrics you consider in an HR analytics report? Now, that's probably a really broad question, right? Because I'm sure you've had a lot of reports and whatnot. But maybe could you just give us your favorite example of some of the metrics that are out there, or maybe metrics that people wouldn't expect that are being collected by HR? Maybe like an unexpected metric?
I think one of the ones that kind of made me giggle, which was somewhat ironic, was at one of the things that we used to track was the campus hires, what schools. And Citi had a real focus on hiring from what they called the platinum schools. So these are the usual suspects. This is the Ivy League, whatever. Now, mind you, I should caveat this by saying I actually went to Yale. So this is not me poo-pooing the Ivy League. I'm a very happy, proud Yale alum. But it just sort of struck me because I thought, really? I went to this school. These people are, at the end of the day, whatever. So I asked, again, I'm great at asking the 3-year-old question. We're so maniacally tracking campus recruiting. That's lovely. Has anybody gone back on the hires and taken a look at the performance rating distribution of those folks that came out of these platinum schools compared to everybody else? Guess what?